Her suitcase hit the pavement at 11:17 p.m. on a Thursday in October. The locks already changed, the porch light already off. Adaise Okafor stood at the base of the steps in a blue dress she had ironed that morning without knowing it was the last morning she would iron anything in that house. She was 29 years old and 7 months pregnant, and the man who had put the suitcase there had gone back inside before it finished sliding off the step. The neighbors on Beatty's Ford Road in Charlotte, North Carolina, heard none of it. A woman named Mrs. Eunice Agbo, on the second floor of the building opposite, had seen the porch light go off, had pressed her face briefly to her window, and had then turned back to her television. The street was quiet. The rain that had been threatening since 6 o'clock finally arrived at 11:21. Adaise did not move from where she was standing for 4 minutes. She stood with both hands pressed flat against the side of her belly, the rain running through her hair and down the back of her neck, looking at the door. Then she picked up the suitcase. She did not know then that behind that door, in the second drawer of the desk in the study where Emeka Bright kept his files, there was a document that would one day put his entire company in her hands. She did not know that yet, but there was a woman 2 miles north on Beatty's Ford Road who already did. Adaise Ngozi Okafor had grown up in Enugu, the third of 4 children, the daughter of a woman who had worked as a bookkeeper for a textile merchant for 22 years before the merchant closed the business and vanished with 4 months of unpaid wages in a folder under his arm. Her mother, Pauline Okafor, had never told her children this story with bitterness. She had told it once, flatly, when Adaise was 11, while refolding the same blouse she had folded twice already, the slow, careful way her mother folded clothes, as though the cloth were precious, even when it was not. "The man took what he could take," Pauline had said. "He could not take what I knew. Nobody can take what you know." Then she had put the blouse in the drawer and asked Adaise to come help with dinner. What Adaise knew was numbers. She had always known them the way some people know faces, immediately, without effort, without needing to write them down. At 14, she had helped a market trader on Ogie Road reconstruct 3 years of handwritten ledgers that had been damaged in a flood, pulling the figures from memory because she had seen them twice while helping the woman carry boxes. At Lagos State University, she had finished her accounting degree in 3 years instead of 4. Not because she had been trying to impress anyone, but because she could not find a reason to slow down. She had been 23 when she arrived in Charlotte on a work visa, with a job at a small financial services firm called Meridian Group. 109 pounds, carrying a purse her grandmother had sewn in 1989 in Enugu from a piece of dark green Kente-style fabric. The shoulder strap repaired twice, with black thread that was a slightly different shade. She had been 26 when she met Emeka Bright at a church fundraiser on a Saturday evening. It had been 34, recently divorced, running a mid-sized import distribution company called Bright Continental out of a building on West Trade Street. It had smelled of cedar and something faintly like engine oil, and he had laughed at something she said about a misquoted figure on the fundraiser's printed program. And she had liked immediately that he had actually understood the joke. They were married 11 months later. She left Meridian Group at his request. Aside, he needed someone he trusted managing Bright Continental's internal accounts. He said family kept family things inside the family. For 3 years, she rebuilt his company's financial records from a state of partial disorder. She found $47,000 in unrecovered vendor credits. She restructured his supplier payment schedule so that his cash flow improved by 31% without him spending $1 more. She created a filing system for his contracts that was organized not by date or alphabetically, but by risk exposure. Highest potential liability at the front, lowest at the back. And she had explained to him once patiently why this was better, and he had nodded and not asked again. She had been wearing the blue dress on the evening of the fundraiser where they met. She had washed it by hand in the bathroom sink the night before she was put outside. By the time she stood in the rain with her suitcase, she had $213 in her checking account. She had no family in Charlotte. Her contract with Bright Continental had been verbal. She had been too trusting to know what that meant until it meant something. She walked 6 blocks north in the rain carrying a suitcase that weighed 14 kilograms. Her feet were wet through the shoes in the first block. The baby moved twice, once at the corner of Beats Ford and Belmont Avenue, and once when a car went past too fast and hit a puddle and threw water against her left side. She counted her steps, not because counting helped anything, but because the act of counting kept her from thinking about the look on Emeka's face when he had handed her the suitcase in the hallway. Not cruel, which would have been beable but efficient, the way a man looks when he is completing a task that is already behind schedule. She had tried his phone twice before leaving the porch. The first time it rang 4 times and went to voicemail. The second time it went straight to voicemail without ringing, which meant he had declined the call while she was still standing in the rain. She put the phone away in her purse, the green grandmother's purse, darkening now with the rain, and stood on the pavement for another moment, breathing carefully the way she had been taught in the prenatal class at the clinic on Eastway Drive, in through the nose for 4 counts and out through the mouth for 7, until hands stopped shaking. The rain on Beatty's Ford Road that Thursday night in October was the kind that comes in sideways when the wind picks up, the kind that smells like wet concrete and the exhaust from a bus that passed 3 blocks back. The streetlights turned the puddles orange. She walked with her head down and her left hand steadying the suitcase wheel over a section of broken pavement. And she thought, with a precision that surprised her, about the fact that she had $213 and 4 days until the 15th, which was when the bill from the prenatal clinic would come. She had always known how to find the numbers inside a situation. She was finding them now. She passed a laundromat still open, the machines going behind glass. 2 women she did not know, sitting on plastic chairs with their coats still on. She passed a pharmacy with a closed sign turned in the door at 11:34 p.m. She stopped in front of it for a moment without meaning to. The prenatal vitamins she had been taking were at the house. She had not thought to put them in the suitcase. She stood in the rain in front of the pharmacy's closed door and understood for the first time the full weight of what unprepared felt like. Not dramatic, not operatic, boot flat and practical and cold, like water in shoes. She walked until she saw a light on in a ground floor window with a small hand-lettered card in the frame that read, Rooms. Mrs. A. Mensah. She knocked. Abena Mensah was 71 years old and had been renting the front room of her house on Beatty's Ford Road to people who needed it since 1998, which was the year her husband Kwadwa had died of a stroke, and she had understood for the first time what it meant to have exactly enough and nothing more. She opened the door in a housecoat and reading glasses and looked at Adais for 4 seconds without speaking. She looked at the wet dress and the suitcase and the belly and the grandmother's green purse darkened with rain. Come in, she said, not with pity, with the efficiency of a woman who has seen enough to skip directly to what needs doing. She made ginger tea with 2 heaped teaspoons of ginger powder and set it on the kitchen table with a towel and a pair of thick wool socks that belonged to nobody anymore. She sat down across from Adais and did not ask any questions until the tea was half finished. Then she asked one, Do you have someone to call? Adais said no. Abena said, You'll stay here until after the baby. I have a room. She charged $280 a month. Adais had enough for 1 month and 3 days. She did not say this. Abena seemed to know it anyway because she said nothing more about the money that night and carried the suitcase down the hall herself. The room was small and clean. There was a window that looked out onto a narrow strip of garden. There was a lamp on the nightstand that gave off the kind of light that makes the inside of a room look warm even when everything outside is cold. Adais sat on the edge of the bed and held the green purse in her lap and did not cry, not because she was not devastated, but because there was a baby inside her who was listening. And she was not going to be the sound that her child heard first. She was asleep by 2 a.m. She slept for 6 hours, the first 6 uninterrupted hours she had slept in 4 weeks. And when she woke, the garden window was pale with early light, and she could hear rain still moving in the drain pipes, and a bird she could not name trying one note over and over. For 3 days, the room felt like safety. Avena brought food without being asked. Rice and contomire stew on the first night, fried eggs and bread in the mornings. A small pot of pepper soup on the third evening that Adaise ate slowly in the kitchen, with her back to the window, because the steam felt good on her face. They did not speak very much. Abena did not ask questions. She moved through the house with the economy of a woman who had learned long ago what was useful and what was not. and she treated Adaise's presence with a practical gentleness that was more sustaining than sympathy would have been. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Adaise Okafor, her maiden name, not Bright, which meant someone had found her here who knew both names. It was from Gerald Adeyemi's office. It was a single page, and it was dense with legal language, but the operative sentence was on the third line. It stated that Adaise had no legal standing as an employee or officer of Bright Continental LLC, that any access she had had to company financial systems had been at the discretion of the sole owner and director, and that she was hereby formally notified that such access had been revoked. She read it twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table and looked at it the way a person looks at a number that does not balance. Carefully, not panicking, because panicking changes nothing in the ledger. The letter told her one thing Emeka's lawyer had not intended it to tell her. It told her that Emeka was afraid. You did not send a letter like this to a woman with $213 and nowhere to go unless there was something that could still be used against you. She had been counting the same $213 for 11 days when Abena Mensah knocked on her door and said she had a phone call. The call was from a woman named Constance Asante, who worked as a paralegal in the office of an attorney named Darlington Osu Boateng on Tryon Street in Uptown Charlotte. Constance had Adaise's name because Abena Mensah had given it to her, and she had Abena's name because Abena Mensah's late husband Kwadwo had been Darlington Osu Boateng's uncle, which was a connection that had never mattered until now. Constance said three things on the phone. She said that she understood Adaise had been working as the financial officer of Bright Continental for 3 years. She sighed she understood the arrangement had been informal, and she said that if Adaise could come to the office on Thursday at 10 a.m. and bring whatever documentation she had of her work, any records, any emails, any files she had saved, there might be something worth discussing. Adaise had brought the hard drive. She had backed up every file on Bright Continental's network the night before she left, not from anticipation of what would happen, but from habit. She had backed up the files every month for 3 years because that was the kind of person she was, the kind whose mother had once watched a man carry 4 months of wages out the door in a folder, and who had decided at 11 years old that she would never be a person who had not made a copy. The hard drive contained 6,847 files. It contained, among other things, a vendor contract signed by Emeka Bright in 2019 with a distributor in Lagos called Envoy Trade Partners, in which a clause on page 11, which Adaise had flagged to Emeka twice in writing, once by email and once on a printed copy with a red pen, gave Bright Continental a first right of purchase on a specific class of import license that Envoy was now about to sell. It contained, also, a company formation document from 2021 that Emeka had asked Adaise to file with the state of North Carolina, a subsidiary entity called BC Logistics Holdings, in which, because she had done the filing herself and Emeka had not reviewed the language carefully, Adaise Ngozi Okafor was listed as co-founder with a 40% ownership stake. Darlington Owusu Boateng reviewed the hard drive over 4 days. On the 5th day, he called Adaise back and said something that made the room go very still around her. He sighed, "You own 40% of a company that is about to become significantly more valuable. And your husband, your estranged husband, does not appear to know. If this story is doing to you what I think it is, subscribe now. Because what Adaise does next is not what anyone expected, and it is the moment the entire story turns." Adaise's daughter was born on a Tuesday 5 weeks after the night on the porch steps. She was 6 pounds, 11 ounces, and she came into the world at 4:22 a.m. at Carolinas Medical Center on Blythe Boulevard, with Abena Mensah sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting area, eating a meat pie from her bag and pretending to read a magazine. Adaise named the girl Pauline, after her mother. She held Pauline against her chest in the hospital bed and looked at her for a long time without speaking. And the nurse near the door pressed both hands flat against her own chest and turned away to give the moment its privacy. Adaise spent 5 weeks recovering. She breastfed. She slept in 2-hour intervals. She ate the food Abena left outside the door, and she read, every evening, the documents Darlington Owusu Boateng had sent her, the contract, the filing, the clause on page 11. She read them the way her mother had once folded blouses, slowly, carefully, as though the material were precious, because it was. In those 5 weeks, Emeka Bright had moved quickly. He had retained a lawyer named Gerald Adeyemi, a man who operated out of a glass-fronted office on South Tryon, and who had managed, in 9 days, to get a judge to issue a preliminary order blocking Adayes from accessing Bright Continental's accounts on the grounds that she had never been a formal employee. The order had been obtained without notifying Adayes, which was possible because Gerald Adeyemi was good at his job and because Emeka had not told anyone that his estranged wife was living 2 miles away in a room on Beatford Road with their newborn daughter and a hard drive. Emeka had also, in those 5 weeks, been in negotiations with a buyer for BC Logistics Holdings, the subsidiary that Adayes had helped create, whose import license rights were valued at $1.3 million by a firm called Atlas Trade Capital. He had sent Atlas Trade Capital a letter of intent. He had not disclosed that there was a co-founder. Darlington Owusu Boateng filed a motion to intervene on a Monday morning at 9:02 a.m. He filed a second motion at 9:11 a.m. to freeze the sale of BC Logistics Holdings pending resolution of the ownership dispute. By 11:30 a.m., Atlas Trade Capital's counsel had put the deal on hold. By 2:15 p.m., Gerald Adeyemi had called Darlington's office 4 times. Emeka did not call. The meeting was at Emeka's office on West Trade Street at 10 a.m. on a Friday, 5 weeks and 2 days after Darlington had sent a formal notice requesting it. The conference room on the 4th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked north toward the city, and a long table with 12 chairs, and a pitcher of water that nobody touched. Emeka arrived with Gerald Adeyemi and a junior associate. Darlington arrived with Adayes. Adayes wore a charcoal gray blazer over a white shirt and dark trousers. She carried a leather portfolio that Abena Mensah had given her that morning without explanation, pressed into her hands in the hallway, and which turned out to contain a notepad and 2 pens and a folded piece of paper that said, in Abena's handwriting, "Your mother's daughter. Go." She set the portfolio on the table and sat down. Emeka looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Gerald Adeyemi. Gerald Adeyemi began to speak, outlining a proposed settlement. Emeka would acknowledge a limited role for Adayes in the formation of BC Logistics, would offer a one-time payment of $85,000 in full and final settlement of any claims, and the sale to Atlas Trade Capital would proceed. The word generous appeared twice in his opening remarks. The word considering appeared once in the phrase generous considering the circumstances. Darlington waited until Gerald finished. Then he opened a folder and laid 3 documents on the table: the formation filing, the vendor contract, the emails, both of them dated 14 months apart, in which Adayes had flagged the clause on page 11 in writing. Emeka's read receipt on the second email was time-stamped at 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. He had opened it. He had not replied. Then Darlington said, "My client is not here to negotiate her right to exist in this company. She is here to discuss how BC Logistics Holdings will be run going forward, since she holds 40% of it, and the sale cannot proceed without her signature." Gerald Adeyemi's hand was resting on the table. It did not move, but his fingers spread slightly, the way a person's hands move when they are trying to stay still. Emeka said nothing for 11 seconds. Not from strategy. His mouth opened slightly and then closed. He looked at the formation document, and then he looked at Adayes. And something passed across his face that was not quite recognition and not quite regret. It was the look of a man who understood, for the first time, that he had been wrong, not about a negotiation, but about a person. Adayes looked back at him without anger. She had spent 5 weeks preparing for this room, and she had no energy left for anger, which turned out to be the most powerful thing she could have brought into it. "I want 40% of the Atlas sale," she said. "I want 40% of any future distributions from BC Logistics. I want documentation of my 3 years of contribution to Bright Continental filed with the company record and retained. And I want a trust structure created for my daughter with 10% of my share in her name before anything is signed." Gerald Adeyemi started to respond. Emeka raised one hand, very slightly, And Gerald stopped. Done. Emeka said. The sale to Atlas Trade Capital closed 31 days later. Adaise's share, 40% of $1.3 million, minus legal fees, was $487,000. The trust for Pauline was funded at $52,000 on the day of closing. Darlington Owusu Batten's firm filed a full record of Adaise's contributions to Bright Continental with the state of North Carolina. The record was 214 pages long. There was no public announcement, no ceremony. At 4:47 p.m. on the day the transfer cleared, Adaise was sitting in Abena Mensa's kitchen, feeding Pauline and reading a lease agreement on a two-bedroom apartment on Pekin Avenue, 3 miles east. With a second bedroom, she intended to convert into an office. She called her mother in Enugu at 5:03 p.m. The phone rang twice. Pauline Okafor picked up on the second ring, as she always did, as though she had been waiting. Adaise sighed. Mama, I need to tell you something. 6 months after the closing, Adaise Okafor opened a financial consulting practice on Moorhead Street in Charlotte, on the ground floor of a building that had been a dry cleaning business until the year before. She painted the walls white. She put a plant by the window. She framed one thing on the wall beside her desk. Not a degree, not a certificate, but the piece of paper Abena Mensa had folded into the leather portfolio on the morning of the meeting. Your mother's daughter. Go. Her first client came by referral from Darlington Owusu Boateng's office. Her second came from the same source. Her third was a woman who had been running a catering business for 9 years out of her home kitchen, and who had never once filed her receipts in a way that let her see what she actually earned. Adaise spent 4 hours with her on a Saturday morning in October, the same month of the year she had been put outside in the rain, going through every receipt from the past 2 years, pulling figures from paper the way she had done as a 14-year-old in Enu, for a woman whose ledgers had been ruined by a flood. At the end of the 4 hours, the woman looked at the number Adaise had written at the bottom of a yellow legal pad and said, "That can't be right." Adaise sighed. It's right. That's what you've earned. You just didn't know it yet. Emeka Bright's company survived. It was not a monster. He had been a frightened man who had made a devastating calculation and had underestimated badly the person he had made it against. He never reached out to Adaise again, except once, 3 years later, through Darlington's office. A letter asking whether Adaise would consider reviewing Bright Continental's restructuring plan as an outside consultant, given her knowledge of the company. Darlington forwarded the letter without comment. Adaise read it once. She set it on the kitchen table beside her coffee and looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote one line on a piece of paper and asked Darlington to send it back. The line read, "My rate is $400 an hour. I am available on Thursdays." Emeka hired her. What he thought he was doing on that porch in October was ending something. He thought he was choosing his own comfort over a commitment, setting down a weight he had decided was too heavy to carry. It was not cruel by nature. He was simply a man who had confused the ability to close a door with the ability to determine what was on the other side of it. He did not know that what he left on that step with the suitcase was not a woman he had finished with. He left behind a woman who carried, in her hands and in her memory and in a hard drive in a pocket of her suitcase, the precise instruments of everything that happened next. You cannot take from a person what they carry inside their own mind. You can lock the door, you can turn off the porch light, you can pay a lawyer to make the paperwork say what you need it to say, but you cannot reach into a woman's memory and remove 3 years of numbers she memorized, because her mother once told her that what a person knows is the one thing that cannot be taken. That knowledge does not go away when you close the door. It waits. It compounds. It becomes, in time, something far larger than the door that was closed against it. Pauline Okafor, 2 years old, does not know yet what her name means. She does not know that she carries, in a trust account in her name on a document filed in the state of North Carolina, the record of a truth that her grandmother in Inu understood long before the words for it existed. She will know it one day. Her mother will tell her, not dramatically, not as a lesson, but the way a woman folds a blouse, slowly, carefully, because the cloth is precious, because it is hers. The people the world tries to leave with nothing are often the ones who already had everything that mattered. The world just hadn't learned to see it yet. Here is the question I want to leave with you today. If you spend 3 years building something, putting your name on it, your knowledge into it, your nights and your care and your skill, and someone decided to walk away and take it with them. And you had one chance to walk back into that room and say something. What would you say? Not shout, not beg. One sentence that showed them exactly what they had underestimated. Leave it in the comments. I want to read every one. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.